Two teams of climbers knelt in the snow beside Beck Weathers, 60 degrees below zero, and checked him. Both wrote the same word in a category mountaineers almost never say aloud. Not injured. Dead? He was not dead. But everyone who looked at him was certain he was, and on that mountain, at that altitude, certainty is enough to end a rescue before it starts. He had been lying there for most of a day and a full night. The wind had scarred the exposed skin of his face. His blood was thickening in the cold. By every rule the people around him lived by, he was a body now, and bodies on Everest stay where they fall. This is the story of the hours after that, of what your brain does when it has decided you are already gone, and of the strange, narrow thing that happens inside a human being when every expert in the world has quietly written you off. It is May of 1996. You may know the date without knowing you know it. 8 people would die on Everest that season in a single stretch of days, the deadliest the mountain had seen until then. John Krakauer was there, and the book he wrote afterward, Into Thin Air, turned that storm into one of the most examined disasters in climbing history. Weathers is in that book. He is one of the men the mountain was supposed to keep. Understand who he was first. Beck Weathers was a pathologist from Dallas, a doctor. Not a professional climber, not a guide, a man in his late 40s who had taken up mountaineering, the way some people take up marathons in middle age, to hold something at bay. He had paid to be there, part of a commercial expedition led by a guide named Rob Hall, one of the most respected men in the business. Weathers trusted him completely. That trust is where the trouble begins. Days before the summit push, Weathers had undergone eye surgery back home. Radial keratotomy, a procedure that reshapes the cornea. What almost no one understood then was how that surgery behaves at altitude. As Weathers climbed higher and the air pressure dropped, his corneas flattened and his vision collapsed. By the time the teams neared the top, he was nearly blind. He told Rob Hall, and Hall, a careful man, gave him a careful instruction. Wait here. Do not move. If your sight comes back, you can descend on your own. If it does not, I will collect you on the way down and we will go together. Weathers agreed. He sat down in the snow to wait for a man who was never coming back. Because higher up, the storm was already taking Rob Hall. So Weathers waited. Hours passed. His vision did not return. Other climbers came down past him and offered to help, and here is the first strange turn, the one that reveals something about how the mind clings to a plan. Weathers refused them. He had given his word to Hall. He would wait for Hall. He sat in the snow near the top of the world and turned down his own rescue, because a promise felt more solid than the weather. Then the storm hit in full. What came down on the mountain that afternoon was not ordinary bad weather. Visibility dropped to nothing. The wind rose past 70 miles an hour. The temperature crashed. Climbers who had summited were now trapped above the camp, unable to find their own tents in a whiteout, roped together and staggering in circles. Weathers ended up in that group, a huddle of exhausted, freezing people lost within shouting distance of safety they could not see. Some of them made it in when the clouds tore open for a moment. A few could not walk. Weathers was one of the ones who could not. He collapsed into the snow, and the cold began to do its work. And at some point in that night his body simply stopped fighting. Here is what the cold does. This is the part worth slowing down for. When your core temperature falls far enough, your body makes a brutal decision without asking you. It pulls blood away from your skin and your hands and your face and hoards it around your heart and your brain. Your fingers freeze so your core can live a little longer. Consciousness fades because the brain is powering down to survive. To anyone watching, this looks exactly like dying. Often it is. But sometimes it is the body buying time with the only currency it has and refusing, at the lowest level, to quit. The next morning, rescuers reached the huddle. They found Weathers and another climber, Yasuko Namba, lying in the snow, encased in ice, unresponsive. Both were assessed. Both were judged beyond saving. In a triage that no one wanted to make, the decision was to spend the limited strength and oxygen on people who might live, not on 2 who appeared already gone. It was, by the cruel math of that altitude, the right call. They left him. A second team came later and reached the same verdict. Twice, trained mountaineers looked at Beck Weathers and saw a corpse. And this is the callback to where we began. 2 teams, 2 rulings. Not injured. Dead. Dead. And that word, once it settles over you on Everest, is almost always final. Except, late that afternoon alone in the snow, something in Beck Weathers switched back on. He would describe it later as a kind of surfacing. His eyes were frozen shut. His right hand was a frozen claw. He had no idea how long he had been down or where anyone was, but a single thought assembled itself in what was left of his mind, and it was not a heroic thought. It was his family, his wife, his children, the plain, stubborn refusal to let them be told he had simply lain down and stopped. He stood up. Think about what that required. A man blinded, frostbitten to the bone, hypothermic, who had been unconscious and killing cold for hours, forced his own legs underneath him at 6,000 feet with no rope, no sight, and no one to guide him. He pointed himself at where he believed the camp had to be, and he walked. Not toward a light he could see, toward a direction he could only guess. And he guessed right. Weathers staggered into Camp 4 looking, by the accounts of the people there, like something that should not be moving. His face was black with frostbite. One hand was destroyed. The climbers who saw him walk in had already grieved him. They had written him off, said the words, made their peace. And here he came, upright, out of the storm that had swallowed him. Even then it was not over. The camp had few resources and a brutal assumption that a man in his state could not last the night. He was put in a tent, and at one point the wind collapsed it, and blew his covering away and left him exposed again. And he lay there shouting into the dark for help that was slow to come, because a second time the people around him had quietly decided he was finished. He was not finished the second time either. The next day he walked down farther, with help now, to a lower camp. And then came one of the boldest rescues in the history of the mountain. A helicopter pilot named Madan Khatri flew a small aircraft to an altitude where helicopters are not supposed to be able to fly, where the air is too thin to hold them up, and lifted Beck Weathers off the side of Everest. It was near the absolute ceiling of what the machine could do. It worked. Weathers lived. He lost his right hand, the fingers of his left, his nose, and parts of his feet to the frostbite. Surgeons rebuilt what they could over years. But he walked out of that season, one of the very few people the mountain had marked as dead, and then failed to keep. Now pull back, because the survival is the surface of this story, not the center. Ask why he lived when the assessment was so confident and so wrong. Part of it was the body, that ruthless trudge of blood toward the core that looked like death and was actually endurance. But part of it was something the rescuers could not measure when they knelt beside him. They could read his temperature and his pulse and his frozen face. They could not read whether there was still a reason inside him to stand. Their verdict was based on the visible. What saved him was invisible, and it was not strength in the way we usually mean it. It was attachment. He got up for the faces of specific people. This is the reframe. You have almost certainly been written off by someone. Told in words or in silence that you were done, that the thing you wanted was beyond you, that the assessment was in and it was final. And the people making that call were often not cruel and not even wrong by what they could see. They were reading the visible you, the measurable you, the you that had, by every sign in front of them, stopped moving. What they could not read is the part of you that decides, on its own timetable, whether to stand back up. That part does not show on any instrument. It does not answer to the odds. It waited, in Beck Weathers, through a night that killed the people around him, and then it chose a direction and walked. The mountain wrote his name in the category it almost never has to revise. Not injured, dead, and a blind, frozen man in Dallas proved that the one assessment no expert can ever fully make about another human being is the assessment of whether they are truly done. Two teams knelt beside him and wrote the same word. He opened eyes that were frozen shut, and he walked back from the place that word is supposed to be final,